Let's dive into today's story. Ross Parker stood in the shell of the 1920s theater, running his hand along exposed brick that had witnessed a century of stories. At 42, he'd built his reputation restoring forgotten buildings, finding beauty in ruins, structure in chaos. His firm, Parker Restoration, had transformed abandoned warehouses into loft apartments, decrepit libraries into boutique hotels. He understood that solid foundations could withstand almost anything. If only he'd examined his own more carefully. "Dad's going to miss my recital again," 12-year-old Brian had said that morning, his voice carrying that particular flatness Ross had started noticing lately. Not anger, just resignation. "It's 3 days, bud. I'll be back Friday night. Plenty of time for Saturday's game," Ross had replied, ruffling his son's dark hair. Brian had inherited his build, tall for his age, broad-shouldered, with those same gray-blue eyes that his wife Nicole always said could see through walls. Nicole, his wife of 14 years, stood in the kitchen doorway, beautiful as ever at 38, her auburn hair catching morning light. But something in her smile seemed practiced lately, like she was performing the role of devoted wife rather than being one. Ross pushed the thought aside. The theater project was demanding. He was probably projecting his stress onto her. "Call me when you land," Nicole had said, her green eyes not quite meeting his. She was dressed for the gym in designer athletic wear that cost more than it should. And Ross, maybe we should talk when you get back. About us." The words had hung in the air like smoke. Before Ross could respond, 8-year-old Caroline had burst into the room, her blonde curls bouncing, gap-toothed smile wide. "Daddy, you promised to help me build my diorama." Ross had swept her into his arms, inhaling the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "When I get back, princess, I promise. Brian will help you until then, won't you, son?" Brian had nodded, but Ross caught something in his expression, a flicker of worry, maybe fear. It vanished so quickly Ross convinced himself he'd imagined it. Now, 3 days later and 200 miles away in Cincinnati, Ross stood in that gutted theater and felt the first tremor of his world collapsing. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Parker? This is Memorial Children's Hospital. Your son Brian brought your daughter Caroline to our emergency room. You need to come immediately." The architectural plans scattered from Ross's hands like leaves. Earlier that night, 2:47 a.m., Brian Parker wasn't supposed to be awake. He'd been trying to sleep when he heard it. His mother's voice, sharp and frightened, coming from downstairs. Then a man's voice, deep, angry, definitely not his father's. His heart hammered as he crept from his room. His parents' bedroom door stood open, bed made but empty. His mother hadn't slept there. Brian knew because he'd been checking every night since he'd found that receipt. Dinner for two at Russo's downtown, dated the same night Mom had said she was at book club. The voices grew louder. Brian recognized the man now, Dominic Knowles, his mother's personal trainer. He'd been coming around a lot when Dad was traveling. Mom said it was for private sessions, but Brian had seen how they looked at each other. He wasn't stupid. "You gave her too much." Nicole's voice cracked with panic. "Dominic, she won't wake up." Brian's blood went cold. He rushed to Caroline's room and found his little sister unconscious on her bed, breathing but unresponsive. A small medicine bottle lay on the nightstand, something called Zolpidem, the adult dosage. "Caroline." Brian shook her gently, then harder. Nothing. He heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, Dominic coming up. Brian's mind raced with terrible clarity. Dominic had been giving Caroline something. He'd overheard fragments before. His mom worried about Caroline getting suspicious, about Dominic always being around, about Caroline almost telling Dad something last week. They'd been drugging her to keep her quiet. And tonight, something had gone wrong. Brian was tall for 12, strong from his basketball team, but he was terrified. Yet when he looked at Caroline's pale face, fear transformed into something harder, colder. His dad had taught him, when the structure fails, you don't panic. You save who you can. He wrapped Caroline in her blanket, lifted her carefully, and slipped out through the upstairs hallway as he heard Dominic and Nicole arguing in the master bedroom. They were debating whether to call 911 or wait and see. Brian didn't wait. The back stairs, out through the basement. His mother's car keys hanging by the door. At 12, Brian had played enough video games to understand the basics of driving, and desperation filled the gaps in his knowledge. The drive to Memorial Children's Hospital was 3 miles of terror, jerky stops, one red light run, his unconscious sister slumped in the passenger seat. But he made it. Please help. My sister won't wake up. Brian burst through the ER doors, Caroline in his arms. The triage nurse took one look and called for a gurney. Doctors swarmed. A kind-faced physician, Dr. Jean Morrison, knelt beside Brian in the hallway. What happened to your sister? Brian's hands shook. He was just a kid, and the adult world was crushing down on him. But he looked at the doctor with eyes older than his years. I think my mom's boyfriend poisoned her. The ER went silent. Ross made the 200-mile drive in 90 minutes. His hands gripped the steering wheel, so tight his knuckles went white. The hospital had assured him Caroline was stable. They'd pumped her stomach, were monitoring her vitals. But Brian's words, relayed by Dr. Morrison over the phone, echoed in his mind. My mom's boyfriend poisoned her. Nicole hadn't answered her phone. 17 calls, straight to voicemail. At the hospital, Ross found Brian sitting in a private consultation room, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm October night. His son looked up, and Ross saw something that broke his heart. A child who'd been forced to become a man in a single night. Dad, Brian's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know if. I wasn't sure. Ross pulled his son into his arms, and Brian finally broke down, 12 years old again, sobbing into his father's chest. Dr. Morrison entered, tablet in hand. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes that had clearly seen too much. Mr. Parker, Caroline is going to be okay. She ingested a significant dose of zolpidem, a prescription sleep medication, but we caught it in time thanks to your son's quick action. She looked at Brian with something like awe. He saved her life. Where did she get it? Ross asked, though dread was already painting the picture. That's what we need to understand. Brian, when you're ready, can you tell your father what you told me? Over the next 30 minutes, Brian described everything. Nicole's affair with Dominic Knowles, Caroline mentioning feeling tired all the time for the past month, finding the medicine bottle tonight, overhearing his mother and Dominic panicking. I went through the bathroom trash last week, Brian admitted quietly. Found 3 empty prescription bottles. Mom's name, but for medications I've never seen her take. Different sleeping pills, anti-anxiety drugs. Ross felt his world tilting. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to be sure. And I was scared you wouldn't believe me. You were gone so much, and Mom kept saying how stressed you were, how you were imagining problems that weren't there. Brian's eyes met his father's. She was gaslighting you, Dad. I heard her on the phone once, telling Dominic they just needed to keep you confused and busy for a few more months. Dr. Morrison cleared her throat. Mr. Parker, I've contacted the police. Given the circumstances, they'll want to interview everyone. And Child Protective Services has been notified. I want to see my daughter. Caroline looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, for in her arm, monitors beeping softly. She was awake now, groggy but responsive, and when she saw Ross, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Daddy, I was so scared. The man said I had to take the sleepy medicine or he'd hurt Brian. Ice flooded Ross's veins. What man, baby? Mr. Dominic. He's been here a lot when you're gone. He gives me juice with medicine in it, says it's vitamins. But tonight he gave me pills and said if I didn't swallow them, he'd hurt Brian. Ross kissed his daughter's forehead, his mind sharp and clear despite the horror. Dominic Knowles had threatened his children, used his wife, poisoned his daughter. The old Ross, the one who still believed in the system, in courts and justice, died in that hospital room. What remained was something colder, harder, forged in the same fires that had once made him rebuild broken buildings. Some structures, he realized, needed to be demolished before you could rebuild. I'm going home, Ross told Brian. Stay here with your sister. A police officer will be outside your room. Don't let anyone in except Dr. Morrison or me. Dad, what are you going to do? Ross looked at his son, and Brian saw something in his father's eyes that made him simultaneously afraid and relieved. I'm going to fix this. Ross Parker arrived home at 6:47 a.m. The house, a renovated Victorian he'd restored himself, where he'd built memories and assumed he was building a future, looked the same. Red brick, white trim, porch swing where Caroline loved to read. But now he saw it differently. A crime scene. Nicole's car sat in the driveway. Lights were on inside. Ross had called his business partner, Alan Robinson, from the road. Alan was ex-military, steady, and owed Ross his livelihood. I need you at Memorial Children's with Brian and Caroline. Trust nobody except Dr. Morrison. I'll explain later. Now Ross stood on his own porch, house key in hand, and made a decision. He wouldn't confront Nicole yet. He'd investigate first, document everything. His architect's mind took over, assess the damage, understand the structure, plan the restoration. He entered quietly through the front door. The living room looked normal, too normal. Someone had cleaned recently. He could smell pine sol and anxiety. In the kitchen, he found his wife sitting at the island, head in her hands. She looked up when he entered, and Ross saw the calculation flash across her face before the tears started. Ross, oh my God, I've been trying to call you. Your phone was off. 17 calls. The battery died. I was so panicked. Caroline got sick somehow, and then Brian took her without telling me. Stop. Ross's voice could have cut glass. I've been at the hospital for 2 hours. I know about the Zolpidem. Nicole's perfect composure cracked, just slightly. That's what the doctors said, but I don't understand how. Where's Dominic? The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Nicole went pale. I don't who. Dominic Knowles. Your personal trainer. The man who's been in this house, around my children, drugging my daughter. Ross, you're not thinking clearly. You're tired, you're stressed. Our son drove Caroline to the ER at 3 a.m. because your boyfriend gave her an overdose. She told the doctors everything. She told me everything. Nicole stood abruptly, and Ross saw the shift, the loving wife mask falling away, replaced by something cornered and dangerous. That little bitch. I told Dominic she was getting too smart for her own good. The admission shocked them both. Nicole's hand flew to her mouth, but the truth was out, poisonous and final. Ross felt eerily calm. Why? You really want to know? Nicole's voice turned bitter. Because you were never here, Ross. Always at some construction site, some dying building that mattered more than your own family. Dominic paid attention to me. He made me feel alive again. So you let him drug our 8-year-old daughter? She was going to ruin everything. She saw Dominic leaving our bedroom one morning, threatened to tell you. He said we just needed to keep her quiet until... Nicole stopped. Until what? She didn't answer. Ross moved past her, taking the stairs to their bedroom. Nicole followed, protesting, but he ignored her. In the master closet, he found a locked metal box he'd never seen before, hidden behind Nicole's shoe collection. Ross was good with his hands. The lock yielded in seconds. Inside, documents that painted a damning picture. Insurance policies on Ross. $2 million in life insurance he'd never authorized. Forged signature. Loan applications in his name. A notarized power of attorney, also forged. And a handwritten note in Nicole's writing. Once he signs the business over for the expansion loan, we'll have everything. Then the accident at the construction site. Police won't question a workplace death. Make it look like falling debris. Ross's hands shook. They'd been planning to kill him. Ross, I can explain. Nicole grabbed his arm. He shook her off, pulling out his phone to photograph every document. Don't touch me. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Dominic said it was just finances, just getting what I deserved after years of being a construction widow. You deserve prison. The front door slammed downstairs. Heavy footsteps. A man's voice called out. Nicole? Baby, where are you? We need to deal with the kid situation before. Dominic Knowles appeared in the bedroom doorway. He was 45, handsome in a practiced way, with salon-perfect hair and expensive clothes that screamed trust fund, but whispered con artist. His eyes went wide when he saw Ross. Well, shit, Dominic said. Ross descended the stairs slowly, phone in pocket now, evidence secured. Dominic had the look of a predator calculating his options, fight, flee, or charm his way out. Ross Parker, I presume. Look, man, this is awkward, but... Ross's fist connected with Dominic's jaw so fast the other man didn't see it coming. Dominic went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. But Ross didn't follow up, didn't lose control. He simply stood there, looking down at the man who'd poisoned his daughter. You're going to wish I'd kept hitting you, Ross said quietly. What's coming next is going to be so much worse. Ross stood in his kitchen while police officers swarmed his house. He'd called 911 the moment he'd found the documents, and Detective Kenny Wilcox, a bulldog of a man in his 50s with sharp eyes, had arrived with forensic teams in tow. Dominic sat handcuffed in the living room, lawyer already called. Nicole sat separately in the dining room, also cuffed, but silent now. The time for explanations had passed. Ross had handed over everything. The forged documents, the photographs of the medicine bottles, Brian's testimony, Caroline's statement from the hospital. Detective Wilcox examined each piece with grim satisfaction. "Mr. Parker, I need to ask, did you assault Mr. Knowles?" "He fell," Ross said flatly. Wilcox's mouth twitched. "Right. Well, he's declined to press charges, which is interesting. Says he walked into a door. Smart man. Not that smart. You know who Dominic Knowles really is." Wilcox pulled out a file. Real name, Dominic Cline. 3 priors in 3 different states: Georgia, Florida, Arizona. Runs romance scams targeting wealthy married women, forges documents, empties accounts, and disappears. Had a warrant out in Arizona for fraud and identity theft. Ross absorbed this. Nicole didn't know? Hard to say. Some of these women are victims, some are accomplices. We'll sort it out. Wilcox leaned forward. But here's what's interesting. Your wife took out those insurance policies 6 months ago. The forged power of attorney? 3 months ago. But the medication regimen for your daughter? That only started a month ago, after Caroline apparently witnessed something she shouldn't have. They improvised, Ross said. Their plan was taking too long, and my daughter became a complication. A complication they tried to permanently silence. Wilcox's face darkened. If your son hadn't acted when he did. Ross didn't let himself go there. Brian had saved Caroline. That's what mattered. What happens now? Ross asked. Depends. We have enough to charge them both. Dominic with attempted murder, fraud, forgery. Nicole with conspiracy, child endangerment at minimum, possibly attempted murder depending on how involved she was in the poisoning. But Wilcox hesitated. Rich people with good lawyers sometimes slip through cracks. Especially if evidence gets challenged, witnesses get confused. What are you saying? I'm saying the justice system isn't perfect, Mr. Parker. Sometimes people like Dominic walk. Sometimes they take plea deals, serve a few years, get out early for good behavior. Sometimes wives play the manipulated victim card and get sympathy from juries. Ross looked at the detective carefully. Are you telling me to do something about that? I'm not telling you anything. I'm just a cop who's seen too many bad people game the system. Wilcox stood. We'll do everything by the book. But between you and me, if I were you, I'd want more than the book. I'd want justice. After the police left, Dominic and Nicole in separate squad cars, evidence tagged and bagged. Ross sat alone in his kitchen and thought. Thought about his children, traumatized. Thought about the years of manipulation. Thought about the plot to murder him. The justice system might fail. Dominic had escaped consequences before. Nicole might cry and play victim and convince a jury she'd been manipulated. Ross pulled out his laptop and began researching. Not just Dominic's criminal history. He dug deeper. Where did Dominic live? Who were his associates? His bank accounts? His patterns? Ross Parker had spent 20 years studying structures, understanding how buildings rose and fell. Now he'd apply those same principles to people. Find the foundations, identify the weak points, apply precise pressure. By dawn, Ross had a plan. It was audacious, probably illegal, and would require perfect execution. He'd build a career making impossible restorations happen. Now he'd restore something else, his family's safety, his children's peace of mind, and his own sense of justice. But first, he needed allies. Alan Robinson arrived at the hospital with coffee and Danish pastries from Brian's favorite bakery. He found Ross sitting beside Caroline's bed, watching his daughter sleep, with Brian dozing in a nearby chair. You look like hell, Alan said quietly, handing Ross a coffee. Ross took it gratefully. Alan was 58, weathered and capable, with the kind of steady presence that came from 20 years in the Marines. They'd met when Alan was working construction after his military retirement, and Ross had offered him a partnership instead of a paycheck. Alan had never forgotten. Need a favor, Ross said. Possibly several illegal favors. Alan didn't even blink. Name it. Over the next hour, Ross laid out everything. Nicole's betrayal, Dominic's criminal history, the plot to kill him, and most importantly, what he'd learned about Dominic Cline's operations. Turns out Dominic has done this before, Ross explained. Always targets married women with wealthy husbands. But here's the interesting part. He never works alone. There's always a female partner, Someone who befriends the wife first, gains her confidence, introduces her to a trainer or a life coach or whatever identity Dominic is using. Who was the partner here? Woman named Marilyn Metcalf. Joined Nicole's gym 6 months ago, became her best friend, then conveniently introduced her to Dominic. Ross pulled up a photo on his phone. Except Marilyn Metcalf doesn't exist. Real name, Marlene Kapinski. Partner in 5 previous cons. So we have 2 professional con artists who tried to kill you and poisoned your daughter, and who've escaped consequences repeatedly by being smart, careful, and connected. Dominic has a lawyer on retainer, Guillermo McLaughlin, dirty as they come. He's already filing motions to suppress evidence, claiming illegal search and seizure. Alan's eyes narrowed. What do you need me to do? I need you to help me make sure they never hurt anyone again. The legal system might not be enough. Detective Wilcox basically admitted as much. You talking about what I think you're talking about? Ross met his friend's eyes. I'm talking about making them face justice on our terms. Nothing that will blow back on my kids. Nothing that will make me a criminal. But something that guarantees they pay. Alan was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm in. What's the plan? Ross smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a pleasant smile. We're going to give them exactly what they wanted, just not the way they expected. 3 weeks passed. Caroline came home from the hospital, physically recovered but having nightmares. Brian, meanwhile, had grown quieter, older, carrying a burden no 12-year-old should bear. Ross made sure they both started seeing Dr. Robbie Welch, a trauma therapist who specialized in children. Slowly, painfully, they began to heal. Nicole and Dominic were out on bail, separate bonds posted by Guillermo McLaughlin's firm. The prosecution was building its case, but as Detective Wilcox had predicted, complications arose. Evidence chain of custody questions. Nicole's lawyers painting her as a victim of Dominic's manipulation. Character witnesses testifying to her devotion as a mother. Ross attended every hearing, watched every legal maneuver, and smiled politely. Because while the lawyers argued in court, Ross was executing a different plan entirely. The key was Marilyn Metcalf, or Marlene Kapinski. Ross had tracked her to a luxury apartment in Columbus, still living free because prosecutors hadn't connected her to the crime yet. But Ross had connected her to something else. 3 other active cons. 3 other wealthy married women being set up for the same fate Nicole had planned for him. Ross made anonymous calls to those women, posing as a concerned investigator. Provided evidence. Planted seeds of doubt. Within a week, 2 of the women had kicked out their trainers, and 1 had filed a police report. Then Ross visited Marlene personally. She opened her apartment door to find Ross standing there with a tablet computer. Mr. Parker, I was wondering when you'd show up. Smart lady. Can we talk? Marlene, 42, blonde, ruthlessly beautiful, stepped aside to let him in. Her apartment was expensive but temporary, the kind of place someone lived when they never stayed anywhere long. You're not wearing a wire, are you? Marlene asked. No, this is off the books. So why are you here? Come to threaten me? Because, honey, I've been threatened by better men than you. Ross set his tablet on her coffee table. I'm here to offer you a deal. You testify against Dominic Klein, provide evidence of his pattern of cons, and I'll make sure you walk away clean. Marlene laughed. Why would I do that? Because Dominic's going down whether you help or not. I've got evidence connecting him to 4 attempted murders across 3 states, not counting my daughter. But you? You're smart enough to take a deal. Immunity in exchange for testimony. You could disappear, start fresh, leave this life behind. And if I don't? Ross pressed play on a video file. Marlene's face appeared on screen, having a conversation with Dominic in a parking garage. The audio was crystal clear, discussing the Parker job, how much money they'd split, and most damningly, Marlene saying, just make sure the kid doesn't wake up. Dead witnesses don't testify. Marlene went white. How did you? I'm very good at finding structural weaknesses. Your car has been parked in that garage for 3 months. The security camera has a perfect angle. Amazing what you can retrieve with the right access. That's illegal surveillance. Probably. Are you going to report me? Because I can't be charged if this video mysteriously ends up with prosecutors. Anonymous tip. Happens all the time. Ross leaned forward. But I'd rather use it differently. I want Dominic to pay for what he did to my daughter. You can either help me make that happen, or you can go down with him. Your choice. Marlene stared at the frozen image of herself on the tablet. What exactly are you offering? I provide this evidence to you. You take it to prosecutors, say you found it, had a crisis of conscience. You testify against Dominic, reveal his entire operation. In exchange, you get immunity, witness protection if needed, and you disappear. But, Ross's voice hardened. If you ever run this con again, if you ever hurt another child, I'll find you. And there won't be a deal next time. You'd really let me walk? I don't care about you, Marlene. I care about my children and stopping Dominic. You're just a means to an end. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I want it in writing. Immunity guaranteed. I'll make it happen. But you delivered Dominic first. Marlene smiled, and Ross saw the survivor in her, the person who'd always known when to jump ship. Deal. That bastard gave me a 30% cut when I did 60% of the work anyway. The trial came faster than expected. With Marlene's testimony and evidence, prosecutors moved aggressively. Dominic's lawyer tried every trick, but the avalanche of evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, testimony from 3 other victims Marlene had identified, medical records showing Caroline's systematic poisoning, and Brian's heart-wrenching testimony about finding his sister unconscious. But Ross wasn't leaving it to the court alone. Through Alan's military contacts, Ross had learned something interesting. Dominic Klein had debts. Serious debts to serious people. He'd borrowed money to finance his cons, always paying back with his fraud proceeds. But now, facing prison, his assets frozen, Dominic was in default. Ross made sure Dominic's creditors knew exactly where to find him. The attack came 2 nights before Dominic's trial was set to conclude. 3 men caught Dominic leaving his lawyer's office. They didn't kill him, just broke both his legs, his right arm, and several ribs. Sent a message. Dominic survived, but was hospitalized, trial delayed. His lawyer tried to argue he was too traumatized to continue. The judge was unsympathetic. Meanwhile, Nicole's defense collapsed when Marlene testified that Nicole had been fully aware of the murder plot, had actively participated in forging documents, and had personally suggested using medication to keep Caroline manageable. She wanted Ross dead, Marlene told the jury. She was tired of being a housewife, wanted his money, his business, and a new life with Dominic. The daughter was just collateral damage. Ross watched Nicole's face as the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, child endangerment, fraud. 75 years combined. Dominic, broken and terrified, took a plea deal. 40 years, no parole. His lawyer tried to argue the assault had prejudiced the case, but Detective Wilcox testified that Dominic's beating was unrelated to this case. Appears to be a personal financial dispute. Ross sat in the gallery through both sentencings. When Nicole was led away in chains, she looked at him once. Ross's face showed nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pain. Just the blank expression of a man watching a condemned building finally collapse. 6 months later, Ross stood in his newly renovated kitchen, watching Brian teach Caroline how to make pancakes. His daughter's nightmares had faded. Her laughter had returned. Brian had grown taller, more confident, and had just been accepted into a gifted program at school. The house had been cleansed. Every room repainted. New furniture. New memories built on top of the old foundation. Alan knocked on the door frame. Got the final paperwork. Nicole signed over all parental rights. No custody, no visitation. She's done. Good, Ross said simply. You know she's trying to appeal? Claims she was coerced, manipulated by Dominic. Let her try? The evidence is overwhelming. Ross poured Alan a coffee. What about Marlene? Disappeared. Witness protection worked. Heard she moved to Montana. Works at a bookstore now. Living quiet. She earned it. Alan studied his friend. You sleep okay these days? Ross considered the question. Better than I expected. You. I'm good. Those assholes got what they deserved. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the kids laugh in the kitchen. Finally, Alan asked the question Ross knew was coming. No regrets? About any of it. Ross thought about the surveillance he'd obtained illegally, the creditors he'd contacted, the evidence he'd manipulated to make sure the case was airtight, the systematic destruction of 2 lives, carefully orchestrated to look like simple justice. None, Ross said. They tried to murder me and poison my daughter. The courts would have given them maybe 20 years with good behavior. Now they'll die in prison. And my kids are safe. You're a scary man when you want to be, Ross Parker. Ross smiled. I just understand structures, Alan. How they're built, how they fail, how to make them collapse at exactly the right moment. I applied the same principles to people. Architect of their destruction. More like urban renewal. Removing blight, making space for something better. Brian called from the kitchen. Dad, Caroline's pancakes are burning. Ross laughed, truly laughed, and went to help his children. The trial was over. The bad people were punished. His family was healing. Sometimes, Ross reflected, you couldn't restore a damaged structure. Sometimes you had to demolish it completely and rebuild from scratch. He'd done that with his life, his family, his sense of security. The foundation was solid now. The walls were strong. And Ross Parker stood guard, a quiet sentinel who'd learned that sometimes the best justice wasn't the kind served in courtrooms. That night, after the kids were asleep, Ross stood on his renovated porch, looking at the stars. His phone buzzed, a message from Detective Wilcox. Heard Dominic got transferred to a maximum security facility. He won't survive long there. Those debts follow people. Just thought you should know. Ross deleted the message and went inside. He had a diorama to help Caroline finish for school, a basketball game to attend for Brian, and a business to run. Life, imperfectly perfect, waiting to be built. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.